What is going on? We're back at it again with another episode of Convos with Dr. Andy. And today we're going to be talking about breathing. For all you mouth breathers out there, we are bringing you some news that is going to hopefully change your mind. And even if it doesn't change your mind, hope it changes your actions because you're loud as hell. Andy, go ahead and kind of lay the foundation for why we're talking about breathing, why it even matters to the average person, right? And maybe where we're going wrong.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I mean, everyone does it, right? Who at least wants to live or live for a prolonged period of time.
Breathing, that is, right?
Breathing,
Okay.
breathing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think this applies to pretty much everyone, all 8 billion plus people on Earth. So that's why we're kind of talking about it, is because although people assume that just breathing alone is enough to, yes, keep you alive, we're not here to just live, right? We're here to thrive. So we just kind of want to dive into some things that we see, some things that have helped us, some things that we've also read about, learned about, different breathing techniques, simple ones that you can just do for free starting today, in your own comfort of your house or wherever you're at. So yeah, I kind of want to just cover this brief topic for people, help them just kind of do something for free.
Yeah. Well, let's start with scientifically, like as layman's terms as you can, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain how breathing actually works and why there's a difference in nasal versus mouth?
Yeah, simply put, so the act of breathing, so you have two airbags in your body called your lungs. So when you breathe in, they get larger, they expand, they take CO2 and oxygen in. And when you breathe out, exhale, right, they get smaller, they push air out, primarily getting rid of CO2 or any other kind of like waste products. But there is just an exchange of gas, predominantly the ones that people need to know about: oxygen and CO2, carbon dioxide. So that's the act of breathing. Why it's so important. People think that oxygen is the molecule of life, right? Without oxygen, something dies, particularly humans. And that's true. However, we also need, many other molecules or just physical matter in this world to live that just help us kind of enhance the ability of us using oxygen. So, yeah, simply put, breathing in and out, lungs expand, contract, help us breathe. Diaphragm, which is the muscle in our body that sits below our lungs, kind of like a tent almost. That's the muscle that we should be using to breathe. But nitty gritty science, or at least kind of tiptoeing into it. So oxygen, we breathe it in, attaches to our red blood cells inside of our blood. Those red blood cells transport that blood or that oxygen to every single cell throughout the body, from the brain all the way down to our pinky toes. The red blood cells, think of it as like a bus. Oxygen on it are the passengers. The bus stops at certain places, capillaries, which is the bus stops, so to speak. Oxygen molecules get off, go into the cells, and go to work, do what they should. They turn into essentially carbon dioxide, right? And they get back on that bus, and then they get shipped to the lungs to then get expelled out. And that's essentially respiration.
Cool. Okay. So that's a miss frizzle explanation there, right? Magic school bus.
Yeah,
Um now
good reference.
now why it was a killer show, still is. I love it.
Awesome show.
Now why so that's happening, right? And would you say that happens nasally or through your mouth?
Yeah, it happens both. Primarily the body's built to breathe through the nose.
Okay, but why? But why? Because I know someone's gonna send someone's
Yeah,
snarky comment's gonna come in the caption like, well, why did you breathe out of your nose, dude?
yeah, right. So the quickest kind of answer to that would be like, well, I can breathe in more air through my mouth, right, than I can my
Mm-hmm.
nose. So
Yeah,
just
like
sheer
more
volume.
volume, straight
Yeah, more
volume.
volume, right? So volume is not necessarily equal to quality. So breathing through your nose, there's a bunch of filters, right? You have
Mm-hmm.
mucosa, you have cilia, which are little hairs that kind of
Mm-hmm.
filter out, microbes or any kind of pathogens or dirt that's in the air that you don't want in your body, in your lungs, right? So it also swirls the air around, warms it, okay, and also moistens it. So it just basically filters the air, right? Just like you would filter a water system. You wouldn't just drink water from a stagnant place, right? You put it through filters. Now, if you breathe through your mouth, right, you don't have any of those filters. So you get raw air exposed to the lungs. Now, if you do that, right, James we've both played sports, right? We've gotten to a place where we're fatigued. We breathe in through our mouth because that's just kind of been a reflex of ours, right? People do this. So we call them mouth breathers. That's kind of loud, but you're not going to die if you do that, every now and then an occasion, right? You could do that for quite a long time, maybe a couple of days. If you want to do an experiment, I would probably not recommend this, but if you just wanted to, for a whole day, try to mouth breathe. You can either like tape your nose shut, right? If you want to hold your hand there, you can, but tape your nose shut, occlude your nose from breathing, and just breathe through your mouth and see what happens to your blood pressure, see what happens to your heart rate, see what happens to your perspiration rate, all these other factors. You're probably not going to be super comfortable. We've all slept through the night with a cold or like sinus congestion and breathe through our nose. It sucks.
We're almost, it's not that you're breathing like half and half, where you're forced to breathe only through your mouth. That
right.
Sucks.
Yeah.
Forced to have to do that. Terrible. Dude, can't get rested, can't get situated.
So the thing that I would say for those people out there that are like, well, I can breathe in more through my mouth versus my nose, right? Out of the sheer just straight discomfort of it over a period of time, right? So what happens is you end up exhaling more CO2 in the short term and long run, right? With mouth breathing than you do nasal breathing. And CO2, we think of like that's just a waste product. Get it out of my body. The less I have in my body, the better. That's not necessarily the case. So CO2 helps detach oxygen from the red blood cells. So it helps to shuttle the passengers off of the bus and get into the tissues and the cells that it needs to do work in. So without enough CO2, oxygen really just kind of keeps floating around in the bloodstream. So we all know that oxygen makes metal rust, right? So in particular, iron. So we have iron in our body, which helps to transport our oxygen. But if our oxygen stays in our blood and doesn't actually get shuttled off the bus, right, just kind of takes the trip around, whatever. So not only is it wasting space, two, it can cause more free radicalization, which are just damaging molecules in the body. So in the long term, it's not great for our health. We want oxygen in the blood, but into our cells. We want CO2 to help get our oxygen, to actually dislodge from the cells into our blood. So if you're mouth breathing, that exchange, that amount of CO2 goes way down, which then causes our oxygen levels or oxygen to not be as efficient in our body. Okay. So what you'll find is heart rate will go up. You'll find that blood pressure will go up, and you actually might find yourself in a bit heightened state of anxiety. Okay. Or stressed out. So we've all probably, when we rode in an airplane, back when they had the old videos pre-COVID and all that kind of stuff, where they talked about, hey, if you're hyperventilating, there's a brown bag in the seat pouch in front of you, right? Grab that, place it over your mouth, and breathe into that. The reason for that is you're exhaling CO2 and then you're breathing that back in. The whole point of that is to level your CO2 back out into your body, right? To bring you back down into a state of calm parasympathetic. Parasympathetic meaning the resting and digesting part of the nervous system. So that's why mouth breathing, in a very general sense, is less efficient than nasal breathing. Is you push out way too much CO2, and you're not taking in the exchange in the lungs with oxygen and CO2 isn't great. Even though you're bringing in more volume of air, it's not as efficient because the air is not as filtered. So you can't exchange CO2 and O2, even though there's more in there.
So almost you have more, but you can use less.
Yeah, perfectly said.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a condensed king that's out here. But okay, so we've now looked at, hey, mouth breathing is second to nasal breathing, right? Mm-hmm. Nasal breathing, though, by itself, you can't just jump into a marathon or a triathlon or assault bike sprints or bar muscle ups or CrossFit, Orange Theory, or what have you, and just start nasal breathing and be able to maintain it through, a 70 to 80% effort workout, though. Why?
I would say so. The simplest answer is just you're not trained for it, mm-hmm. right? So it'd be the same as if, we talked earlier, like holding your breath underwater, right? I think the longest somebody can hold their breath underwater, I mean, it's a long time, but let's just say 5 minutes, right? Like that's pretty attainable, under, I know, James, you're looking it up, but like holding your breath for 5 minutes underwater is a pretty substantial amount. Mm-hmm. But I'm not just going to ask somebody to go do that right off the bat because they're not trained to do it. Their body's going to go into an extreme panic mode. Now, the reason for that is you have primarily two parts of your body that kind of regulate your survival mode. One is the amygdala, which is this tiny little almond shape, where you have two of them, one on each side of your brain, almond shaped part of your brain that primarily deals with your fear center. So like you see a bear, the amygdala lights up, you run away, right? You see somebody pointed with a gun at you, you either attack them to defend yourself, right? Or you flee, fight or flight. So the amygdala gets lit up in that. You also have these things called chemoreceptors that are loaded in the carotid arteries of your neck, the primary blood vessels that bring blood to your brain, okay, from your heart. So these chemoreceptors, which sense CO2, if they sense that there's a increased level of CO2, such as when you hold your breath, right, or when you mouth breathe excessively, which would drop CO2, those centers are going to read that and they're going to fire up the brain to kind of put you in this state of high stress. So the reason why, James, you ask, why can't I just go right into the training and do this, hold my breath or nasal breathe, is because when you nasal breathe purely for that, and you haven't trained for allowing yourself to build up CO2 in the body, as soon as you start doing that and putting yourself into an environment where you're working out, putting more demands on your body, increasing your CO2, if your chemoreceptors in your neck are not adapted to having that high level of CO2 increase, it's going to pretty much just send off fire alarms and you're going to freak out. And that's going to cause a reflex to have you go into mouth breathing. Mm-hmm. So a few ways that you can, train this, and we'll talk about this in just a second, but is, force yourself to nasal breathe in a more comfortable setting, with certain breathing techniques. And we'll talk about box breathing in a second, but, if you have the ability to do this type of training, and I'm not saying that everybody does, is they do have offices out there, and a lot of these are primarily people that do research on this, because I believe there's only a handful of people that study respiratory breathing in this manner. But they'll actually put masks like oxygen but CO2 masks over you, and you'll breathe in just like 5 or 7% CO2 versus like the 1 to 2% that we normally breathe in the air. And so that amount of CO2 increase, right, is going to cause an increase of stress on your body, because that's more than what it's used to taking. But doing that over a few sessions, prolonged period of time, can actually help you in real life as far as increasing output and performance, right? It's been shown to help decrease people's anxiety and people's depression, because those people that have high levels of anxiety or depression or some of these other neurological inefficiencies, I would say, if you can increase your ability to handle high levels of CO2, you're making your body more hardy, more durable. The ability for it to bounce back or handle stress becomes higher. So you don't flip the switch when you see a dirty dish in the sink and freak out on your significant other, or the garage isn't clean, or you're able to handle a situation such as a perceived threat much more calmly. Or like you said, James, if you want to go out and try to train for a marathon, or if you want to go do a heavy high intensity CrossFit Metcon, right, you might be able to handle that higher level of performance and output.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when we're talking about breathing, because I never necessarily looked at nasal breathing as being the key to getting less of a physiological response, like negative response, I would say, when you hit a stressor, right, in the moment, right? When you hit something acute, like, hey, you have that workout coming and you go a little bit too fast, hot out the gate, or you're in a physical altercation, or you're wrestling and you end up on your back and you're not comfortable there. I never really looked at nasal breathing as being the key to that. I looked at box breathing, or a variation of like breath, like guided or unguided meditative breath, as a way to get there. It's interesting though that when my sleep started to go like through the roof, right? And what I mean through the roof, like quality through the roof, but quantity really didn't change, but quality got way deeper, right? Way deeper, which in turn made it much better. When I started wearing mouth tape, because I would find myself sometimes when I was super tight, I would end up on my back, right, when I was sleeping. But when I would end up on my back, and my head is just slightly elevated, well, what would happen? My mouth would open. And then next thing you know, I'm sitting there and it's, I'm waking up a little bit before my alarm. My body's kind of keyed up. I'm waking up like 2 or 3 minutes before my alarm and like, cool, we're good to go. But I would be like, yo, why is my throat feel like I've just been sucking air out of a convertible? You know what I mean? Like my head's just like out the window. Like what is happening in the back of my throat? And yeah, it's been completely different when I put mouth tape on. Now, it doesn't feel too great on a mustache. So you kind of have to go up under the stash and then pull down tight. But dude, I tell you what, man, nasal breathing while you're sleeping, right? And if you're congested, it's kind of hard to do. And so the other night I had to rip the tape off in the middle of the night because I woke myself up because I was like, yo, I cannot get enough breath in. But it's fascinating, man. It's definitely fascinating. And I think the first time that I knew that I didn't have, and I'm kind of jumping all over the place here, but when you're talking about just being able to breathe through your nose, the first time that I knew that I was shit at breathing was when I was on the bottom of a wrestling match and someone was we were in practice, like wrestling off for who's going to start the weekend at the quad, like for our competition. And I was wrestling someone a little bit heavier. I was going up in a weight class because I got out wrestled for the lower weight class. So like, oh, whatever. Let me take this starting spot. Yeah. Let me go up. And I panicked when someone was on my chest. So on my chest and my rib cage, and I could not get a breath in. And my heart rate went through the roof. My fear, like, oh my God, I'm going to die under here. And literally, this is not life or death. We're in a wrestling room with headgear on, dude. And like, it's just to pin somebody. That's all it is. But that in 7th grade, that is when I knew that my ass was terrible at breathing, 100%. And it was reintroduced to me when we used to run after that for football practice. I found myself like randomly getting too stressed about running and holding my breath, right? Or going in to hit somebody and holding my breath. I'm like, what am I doing? I don't need to be doing this shit. It's not helping me at all. And now I find, and I'm not as conditioned as I used to be, but when I was doing a lot of training when I was in law enforcement and was trying to go in the military, kind of like looking at federal stuff, I was doing a whole lot of nasal breathing, rucking. So, 30 to 50 pounds on the back. Zone 2, so heart rate is like not crazy, right? Manageable in boots, but nasal breathing the whole time. My conditioning has never been that solid in my life outside of that time. It has never been as solid as it was during that time when I was going slow and steady wins the race, but all through my nose. No mouth breathing. Zero.
Yeah, I think people, and including myself, because it kind of goes against like what you initially think, right? Where, just getting something done, right, doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most effective or efficient way to do it, right? And I think that we as humans are such great, we have such great capability of adapting that we applaud, just getting the job done versus, how we do it. And so we see that in sports all the time, right? Like just get the job done, right? And like somebody, limps, that extra how many inches in football and like with a fractured, tibia, let's just say, right? Or on a broken ankle or something. We kind of applaud that. We're like, yo, he's a warrior, right?
Brute force it.
Yeah, brute force it. So I think there's too much of like, don't get me wrong, if you're getting paid millions and millions of dollars or however much you're getting paid to do that, like, yeah, by all means, performance, right? But we're just talking, for strictly science, health-based, longevity, that kind of stuff. Yes, nasal breathing far and above, even if you don't believe us with all the science, right? With the superficial science that we covered, just do this experiment yourself. So just like take the next, 5 minutes, let's just say, and just strictly breathe through your mouth and just see how you feel. Right. If you want to kind of go extreme and see what it really feels like for somebody who's kind of going through, like, saying a panic attack or something like that, do quick breaths in and out your mouth, right? For the next, 3 to 5 minutes, however long until you, don't want to do it anymore, which won't be that long. Versus, if you do that, then go straight to nasal breathing and go 4 seconds in, hold for 4 seconds, 4 seconds out, and then hold for 4 seconds. That way. That's called box breathing, by the way. And we'll kind of finish the episode, kind of just with that as something that you guys can do. But, and see how your heart rate comes down, see how your blood pressure comes down, see how you just start to get this calmness over you. James, you kind of already talked about it, like sleep, incredibly quality went way up, right? So there's massive benefits holistically and systemically that breathing through your nose can do, right? But the other thing too is you mentioned, James, congestion in your nose. One thing I want to touch on for those of you that say like, well, I'm chronically, stuck with allergies, right? And I can't breathe in my nose very much, or I'm constantly fighting an infection, you name it. So some people, might be born a little bit less, advantageous than I'd say others. So with some of their facial structure. But contrary to say like a thigh bone, your femur or your shin or your wrists, the bones of the cranium continually grow throughout your life. I should say grow. They continually change throughout your life, whether you know how you use them. And one big thing that we can do to help increase our sinus cavities and even jaw, right, naturally, okay, and I'm not talking steroids, okay, but is to chew. And James, I'll let you kind of allude to the type of gum that you had mentioned to me earlier. I believe it's mastic gum, but you probably used it. But so chewing is massive for helping to develop not only the mastication muscles, mastication meaning chewing, okay, but it also helps to bring a little bit more girth to your jaw, right? But then also open up your sinus cavities. So I'm not saying you go chew a piece of gum for an hour today that boom, all of a sudden, your nose is going to break free and you're going to be able to breathe like you've never been able to breathe before. No, this is something that you're going to have to do, as a habit, right? But you can change the internal structure of your nasal cavities and give them a little bit more room to breathe in and out that you may not have had in prior years, or maybe even your whole life. So, I just wanted to kind of touch on that just for people that are like, well, I'm chronically stuffed up or sinusy or have, sinus infections, always getting cold and yada, yada. But is there anything that you want to touch on with the mastic gum, maybe like where you get it or just like if you've used it and what success you've had with it?
Yeah, I think it's a tool. It's like anything, right? And one thing that I want to say before we even talk about mastic gum is like nasal breathing, barefoot shoes, toe spacers, grounding, a lemon, a citrus concoction with some honey in it. Like all of it is labeled all the time as biohacking. And I want everyone to be aware that that's a term that's given for two reasons. One, for other people to categorize those people as an out group from who they are. And number two, for the people to have an identity within another group that they feel like they can excel in. Some of the things that you see in traditional medicine, beautiful. Some of the things you see in Chinese medicine, beautiful. Some of the things that you see in CrossFit or in Pilates or in PT or Chiro or in the biohacking community, beautiful. Not everything is God, right? Not everything and that everyone believes is God. Now, I do think that you can't just throw out the efficacy of nasal breathing because most biohackers do it. You can't throw out that, potentially a more dense animal protein like red meat, right? Raised in a certain way is going to be better for you than eating some bullshit that's faux egg, right? Or faux meat. And I want the same thing to be understood here, that like mastic gum is cool, right? And it's a tool, right? It's a tool for you to get more chewing. But guess how also you can do this, right? Chew your food longer. Okay. If you're like, hey, James, like I'm not doing all this weird shit, like extra chewing gum. Like I like my spearmint, my sugar-free spearmint. That's sweet. Awesome. Wonderful. That's not really going to help your jaw the way that you think it is. It's not hard enough. So mastic gum, the viscosity is not really the right word for it. It's more like the density of it is higher. It's harder to chew, right? But it's also gum that isn't flavored intentionally because you reuse it, right? It's something that you use again, right? So you could chew that same piece of gum 3 or 4 times. Now, you could say, oh, that's disgusting, yada, yada. Cool. Brush your teeth, right? Come on, figure it out. But having something that's a little bit more difficult to chew on will obviously help you with the ability to chew, right? Same thing on the nose side. I think this is important to say on the nasal breathing. You can go ahead and give yourself an aid, not a crutch, but an aid with nose strips. You're chronically congested. Cool. Force the airways open a little bit more and start there. And then maybe start looking at some exclusionary diet things to make sure that your nose is not jammed up day in, day out, right? It's going to take more than 1 day. It's going to take more than 30 days. It's going to take you trying a few things and figuring out what works for you, right? So I think that mastic gum could help. There's a thing called Jazzercise, right? It's like I think it's like silicone with like a plastic inside, and it's still pliable, right? But it's not very pliable. And you put it on one side and you bite down, and you put it on the other side, then you put it in the middle. It's something that could work, right? You don't have to look like a clown at the circus, right? To get some jaw exercise. You could just actually chew your food. Most people, on average, don't chew their food. They get a bite and then they swallow, and then a bite and then they swallow. Just chew your food a little bit more. That's a great place to start, right? For the jaw. And then also some Breathe Right nasal strips. Breathe Right has been around probably since the 60s, 70s, or 80s, right? The little cheapo one-time use adhesion on your skin, easy peasy, right? Pop them on, right up where the bridge of your nose starts, and it will open your nasal passages just a little bit, and then you can pull it off when you're done. That's fine. Just starting with a little bit of that will help you progress. You don't have to go from today, I'm a mouth breather, and tomorrow, I'm a nasal breather forever. It's not how life works. You know what I mean?
Damn, I thought it was that easy.
Nothing is that easy. Anything else that you think that we missed?
No, I mean, we could obviously go, way deeper into this. I think that just last thing I'll finish on is just box breathing. Again, what that is, like James said, all these things are just tools, right? So if these don't work for you, or if you don't like them, hey, you know what? You've wasted, I don't know how many minutes this podcast is, right? But hopefully
20 minutes, maybe.
20
like,
minutes.
Yeah, like it's 20 minutes of your time, and you waste more time watching porn, driving down the street, playing on TikTok while you're in the car. Like, come on now. It's okay.
Yeah. Plus it's free unsolicited advice. So, but lastly, like James said, the nasal strips, right? The Jazzercise or the mastic gum. There's other forms of gum out there that are specifically meant for chewing. I'm blanking on their names, but a lot of them come from the Middle East, if not like kind of somewhere in middle part of Europe. But yeah, the last thing, box breathing. So again, simply, I do this before I go to sleep. If I'm having a hard time falling asleep, is I inhale 4 seconds through my nose. All this is through your nose. Inhale 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4, and then hold out for 4 seconds. So everything's 4. Okay. But James, you do that probably for a lot longer than I do. I typically do it for about 5 to 6, maybe 8 cycles. So I can't do the math off my head how long that is, but I just count in my head, 8 times or so. And that I've noticed that really helps me just kind of like take my mind off of whatever's stressing me out innately, but it also just drastically reduces my blood pressure and heart rate, so I can just go to sleep easier. So, and again, if that helps you, awesome, give it a shot. You can always, do more than that, do more than just the 8. And then again, this stuff is meant to be habits. So little by little, right? It's not going to just make a huge impact maybe tomorrow, but make it a part of your life. See what happens.
Yeah, we're looking for a physiological and a psychological response. I mean, the more that we can stack one action that will give us both, that will play both mental between the ears and also give your full body, some relief or some push towards a direction that you're trying to go, the better, right? Yep. And also, it doesn't require you paying us anything to do these things. It also doesn't require you paying us anything to not do these things. So up to you, totally up to you. But I do want to correct one thing that I do want to correct. The longest time breath held voluntarily,
yes,
right, by a male is 24 minutes and 37 seconds.
Ooh, is there a female up there or no, just the male?
Nope. And this was in 2021. That's a new record from a guy in Croatia. So this is Guinness World Records.
That's impressive.
24 minutes, 37 seconds. Now, it's different. He's not free diving. He's on the edge of a pool. His head's about this far in the water. He's voluntarily, so no one's touching him, no one's holding him, no one's nothing. But he is, if you find the video, he is completely relaxed. There's no tension in his face. There's no tension in his shoulders. He is just present. That's it.
And for those of you guys, so if you want to do some like reading into this kind of stuff, just to make sure that we're not, blowing smoke up your asses. So a few, Wim Hof, I know a lot of people out there, probably follow him, right? If you've never heard of him, it's spelled WIMHOF. Wim Hof, he's an American, but I think he lives overseas now. But anyway, so he's used a lot of ancestral breathing techniques, and he's also kind of modified it, and he made it super easy for a lot of people to do it in today's society. And then the book Breath by James Nestor, also a really good reference. for you guys that actually.
Also Breathe by Rickson Gracie, who's one of the BJJ greats internationally, period, end of story. That is also a wonderful book about breathwork. Wim Hof has a ton of work, like video, masterclass style, and, audiobook and physical copy to read. Rickson, I think, has the obviously he's got the paperback and the hardback, and then also has the Audible. And I'm sure that whoever you're talking about with that third book also has both versions there. Yeah. And I'll put links to all of those down in the description, so anyone can go grab it if it's something you're into.
Perfect. All right, guys, go nasal breathe.
Heck yeah.